Good afternoon, and welcome to the Virginia Bar Association Practice Management Advisor webinar for the month of June. I'm Paul Fletcher. I'm the Executive Director of the VBA. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Small Firm Tech in the Age of AI. Joining us is our friend Jeff Schoenberger of Lawyerist and Affinity Consulting, and he is going to present on that topic. I want to share one thing with you. Many of you may have seen that the VBA has a new website that literally has been up. This is 1 week today that we've been up. The PMA material is still under construction for what we're going to do. You may recall seeing it on the old site. We are going to be bringing it back probably sometime in the fall. So with that introduction, Jeff, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. I have as Sunny wrote in there, I've got the chat up. So if you have any questions as we're going along, feel free to throw them in the chat. And as Paul noted, got the brand new website up and running and wonderful article there on doing value-based billing from a new VSB ethics opinion out. So take a look at that. Because I think, we at Affinity and at Lawyerist are big fans of value-based billing, and nobody really likes recording their time and tracking it. So if you can work your way towards something that's value-based, it's probably a little bit pleasant for you as well. We're going to go through seven main ideas here. And of course, one of them is going to be AI, and it's going to be the focus of most of our time when we're thinking about small firm tech today. I think it's kind of hard to deliver a legal tech and maybe even a legal presentation anymore without mentioning, what is the role of artificial intelligence? What do we see that doing? We'll highlight a few like straight tech and a couple of security things, and then most of the time we'll be spending on AI specifically, getting you up to speed on how you can make use of it, some of the concerns about it, and give you a couple of ideas about different products or product categories to look at depending on your practice area. So like I said, we're gonna go through seven together. And yes, of course, one is artificial intelligence. I always start any sort of legal tech summary or overview presentation by making sure that we are thinking about security. We're keeping a lot of valuable stuff that our clients have entrusted to us. What are we doing to make sure that that information is protected? And it's kind of a twofold thinking. One is like from keeping bad guys out, and two is from making sure our own equipment is functioning well. Ransomware, as you might expect, has been on the rise. 80% of ransomware attacks that we're seeing are the result of phishing. So those emails that you get that purport to be from Amazon or purport to be from your internet service provider or from Microsoft or Google, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, on down the line. They're getting better and they're getting pretty smart. And I got a little bit of a surprise at the end of this small section because I was absolutely dumbfounded when one of our coaching clients that we have showed this to me, that what she had found and what she had gone through. When we're thinking about phishing, there is a certain amount of technology that we can put in on the back end. Barracuda, there are other programs and stuff that can do email screening. And I expect if you're using one of the big providers, they're probably already doing a fair amount of that themselves. The other thing we can always think about is user education. What can we do either ourselves if we're a true solo, or if we're a little bit larger of an organization, what can we do to educate folks about what's out there, what we can avoid or can look for, what sort of signs. So I'm going to run through a few signs. Hopefully some of them have come on your radar before, so this isn't brand new stuff. Of course, if they get a domain that is very similar to one that you are accustomed to seeing, then they will send out emails purporting to be, in this case, from Microsoft. This was an actual email I received. You notice if you do look at the end of that email address, which is essentially the stuff after the @ and the most important part of the stuff after the @ is the last bit for the period. So in this case, we're looking at micra, M-I-C-R-A, office365.com. When I got this, it was fortuitously timed from the Fisher's point of view, let's say, because I had been traveling that week and I would have been signing in from an odd IP address. For me personally, there are two things that should have shown up right away, as actually possibly three, that it was a phishing attempt. One, and the most obvious and the one that would be most universally applicable, is the misspelled domain. It's very unlikely Microsoft is going to send something from Microsoft. And then for me personally, I use a Mac. I don't use Windows. So even though I was traveling, if I had been logging in from a strange location, it wouldn't have been on Windows. And thirdly, I'm not sure anybody still uses Internet Explorer. Even if you're on Windows and you're doing whatever they gave you out of the box, you're using Edge at this point and not Internet Explorer. And then obviously a majority of people, or at least a plurality of people, probably use Chrome on Windows at this point. So depending on your tech setup, there's at least one guaranteed way to know that this was, or have a sense that this was fake, and then a couple additional ones that might plan for you. This is another example of two characteristics that we want to think about when we look at potential phishing. One is if you receive something with a hyperlink and you think it might be suspicious, as long as you're on a laptop or, well, actually, we could talk about the new iPad OS and it might be able to do this too. But certainly if you're on a laptop or desktop, you can move the mouse over that link, hover, do not click, and it'll tell you where it might be going. And in this case, it purports to be something from the New York State Bar Association. If I hover over it, though, it goes to a CA domain, which may be Canada, I'm not sure, but it is certainly unlikely that the New York State Bar would send me a document that linked to a Canadian website, and furthermore, that it went to some admin portion of that site. So hover, don't click. If you followed Apple's operating system announcements back on like June 7th, I want to say, about 3 weeks ago, iPad OS will get a much more flexible cursor. So if you use one of the keyboards and you add a trackpad or something with your iPad, at this point, the cursor moves, like it jumps. It goes from button you can click to next button you can click. It doesn't wave around like I can do over here with my typical mouse. Starting with iOS 26, which will be out in the fall, the mouse can, if you choose, behave like a mouse does on our screen now on a regular computer. In that case, even on iPad, you might be able to hover at that point, but not out yet unless you're really experimental and you like using the beta software. The other sign that this might be a phishing attempt is that, well, Tara's a real person. I've worked with her, but I hadn't worked with her for a while when this came in. And so it says, I've attached all the document, you always look for those spelling weirdnesses, that you'll need per our recent conversation. We hadn't had a recent conversation. So what do I do if I get that sort of weird thing? I might be inclined to, but I would not just reply, because if they've hijacked her email, the reply might go to the fisherman, let's say, rather than to Tara. Second thing I might be tempted to do, and this is where we get to the more interesting component that I'll show you in just a minute, is I might be tempted to pick up the phone and call that direct number. I don't know what Tara's phone number is. So I don't know if that's actually her phone number or if it's a phone number that the scammers have gotten. So in this situation, I would A, not click on the document, B, go via a web browser, or if I store the information in my Outlook or Google Contacts, find a known good phone number for her and go that route. And if I don't have a known good phone number, I don't click on the nysba.org link in this email, again, for the same reason. I go to my web browser and I type in, New York State Bar, bring it up, and start with their switchboard from their website and work our way up and see if this really is from Tara. Another example, and this I received, I think last fall, was a QR code phishing attempt. So I don't know if you've seen any of these lately, but that's pretty creative, because we've been led to believe, and in the case of authentic multi-factor authentications, it is true that multi-factor authentication is more secure. So you might think that this popped up for any number of reasons, and so you just scan it. It's going to take you to a site. I did not go to the site, but I would almost guarantee the first question as part of your multi-factor authentication is entering your username and password. So another way that they're trying to get to you. And then This example kind of builds on the example with respect to the New York State Bar. Whoever sent this to Paul, who's one of our owners, was very intelligent, very craftily designed this, because it says you made some sort of security change. We don't send anything over the email because it's not secure. So give us a call and we'll talk to you about what the hell is going on. That is not Spectrum's phone number. So if Paul had called them, he would have gotten to talk to scammers from whatever location they're based in. So a known good phone number is what you want to start with. Something in your record, something on the company's website that you've gone to directly, not by clicking links in the email, and then proceeding to reach the person that's trying to reach you or purportedly trying to reach you. And this is the one that I absolutely found astounding. So I have a client who had questions about how to use Microsoft Outlook Calendar. She's a Microsoft 365 subscriber. She's on the business plan. She gets Microsoft Copilot as part of her subscription to Microsoft 365. So she went to Copilot and said, how do I reach out to somebody when I have questions about getting the Outlook calendar to work? The information that Copilot provided her is a scam phone number. You would think Microsoft makes Outlook, Microsoft makes Copilot. Microsoft ought to be able to prevent you from imitating or misleading you as respect of Microsoft tech support on Microsoft's product. So that was a new one, and that was pretty astounding. So in this case, you shouldn't really be relying on artificial intelligence even to provide you the contact information for its own creator. So a few simple guidelines to wrap up this education portion. Phishing scams target everyone. There can be some that are more, say, discreet or targeted. If you're going after high net worth individuals, they usually call it something like whaling. If you're going after an individual, like somebody that you are specifically targeting, it's usually called spear phishing. But in general, it's just kind of like the background radiation of email and texting at this point. I get a ton of those texts saying, hey, you've got a traffic ticket or a red light camera ticket or something. Just delete the text. Don't click on unknown links. Call from a known good phone number or to a known good phone number before you click. Imposters are getting better and better. They're getting smarter. And in some cases, they're aided by AI. And it just helps to be paranoid or a little paranoid, right? Second thing to think about out of our 7, when we think about what are we looking at with respect to IT in the AI age, depending on the size of your organization or the frequency with which you change devices, or maybe you're like me and you're trying out some new program and you put some information in there to see how it works, you don't really like it. You don't always go back and delete the account. You don't always go back and make sure you purge even the test information that you put in there. And so that account that you tried for a while just kind of, molders, and who knows what happens to that information that you provided. So think about shadow devices. That's the most obvious thing. So if you've got a stack of old phones that over the last 15 years of modern smartphones since the beginning of the iPhone, or the same thing, you've used an iPad for work for a while and then it gets slow, or maybe you dented it, or you got a new model because you want to use the new cursor, and you give it to your kid and whatever. Want to make sure that you are taking the information, that you're resetting the devices as you're sending them on to their second life, whether it's recycling or kid, grandkid, neighbor, whatever, eBay. So most device manufacturers have gotten pretty darn good about making this relatively easy to do. If you haven't tried to reset an iPhone or an iPad to wipe it, just do a quick Google search. It'll take you right to Apple's help article. It's literally an option in the settings menu. It's like under settings, general, and then reset. Completely wipes the thing, painless, easy to do. Pretty much the same experience with Macs. Windows machines, at least with Windows 11, have gotten pretty darn easy on that too. So it's easier than ever to make sure that you have cleansed the device when you get rid of it. If you're still using the device, you absolutely want to make sure you're keeping all of that information up to date with respect to security patches. One of the things that I like about well, the Mac App Store on the laptops, and then you probably notice it with any of your mobile devices, is those apps just get updated in the background. A few apps, and more so on Windows, we see the situation where you launch it, and then that's where it checks for an update, which is still okay because it's going to check before you use it next. But to the extent that you can automate this in the background, and the larger a firm that you are, there are some solutions that if you have an IT person in-house or you farm this out to somebody for a managed service setup, that they can take care of making sure that those updates and reboots happen when they can't be, pretty easily automated, like the operating system updates and a few other things. So make sure that you're on top of that. That applies to all of the devices you're actively using. If you're not actively using the device and you're not sure when you're going to use it in the future, I would be inclined to go ahead and wipe it now. That way, if it happens to disappear or whatever, it's not a potential exposure. Backups, we talked about this when I mentioned ransomware. So there are two dangers that come in with any sort of data attack. One is that you can't get to your data and you might have to pay for it, which we want to avoid. Easiest way to do that, make sure we have a good backup regimen. And I say backups, not just syncing, because when we think about syncing, think about what a sync service is supposed to do. I don't care whether it's Dropbox, OneDrive, Google Drive, any of the rest of them out there. It's supposed to take the change that you made on one device, be it your phone, your tablet, your computer, and instantly and immediately and seamlessly broadcast that change to the copies of the files everywhere else. So if your laptop gets infected, it finds the infection finds those files, encrypts them. That encryption, by virtue of the way the sync service is designed to operate, broadcasts that change everywhere else. So a backup and a sync service are different things. They serve different purposes. I use them both. I would not want to be without my Dropbox. I would not want to be without iCloud or OneDrive, but it is not the same thing as a backup. It'll work wonderfully as a backup if you took your laptop and accidentally dropped it in the ocean at the beach. Files are still safe. They're in OneDrive or they're in Dropbox. And so in that sense, it can be a backup, but I would not think of it as my primary or my sole backup. It serves a different function, serves a great function, but a different one than the backup. So you need both of them. Have a backup. Make sure you test it. It's a terrible thing to say, hey, I got this backup set up and it works wonderfully. As far as I know, it runs. I've never tried to restore it. And oh, golly, I need it now and it doesn't work. Or I changed my folder structure and I had the backup working on the documents folder, but then I created a clients folder and I never told the backup system. So it never backed up the clients folder. So make sure it's grabbing the right things. Make sure that you test a restore. And when you look at these backup programs, one thing that you might want to check, and this is a nice special addition as far as ransomware or cryptologic attacks, look for what's called an immutable backup or object lock. It means that if you upload a file and it is marked as immutable or it's locked, it cannot be overwritten. So if you have an immutable backup of your client files and you get hit with ransomware, those files will not be replaced or overwritten or aged out because they are marked as immutable. So you've got one known good, steel vault buried hundreds of feet under the ground that is gonna stay safe and secure. If you don't have a backup regimen in place, especially if you're a solo or small firm, Backblaze, Carbonite, they're kind of neck and neck. Look at them both, see which one you like. They both run on Windows and Mac, so no difference there. They both let you encrypt your backup with a password only you know, assuming you want to go that route. You might lose a few features if you go that route, but you do get a substantial enhancement to security because even if, not aware of a case where this has happened, but even if one of these backup organizations were served with a subpoena or a lawful warrant, when they turn over your backup, whoever they give it to still needs your password to unlock that encrypted backup. You want it to run in the background so you don't have to think about it. You want it to run on a nice regular interval. On my personal computer, it runs every hour on the hour, and then there's an aging of backups, so it keeps like every hour for a week and every week for a year, and then it starts, trashing the older stuff so that I don't pay for oodles of storage. Having said that, you will be surprised at how inexpensive a ton of storage is. So assuming you're not doing lots and lots of video depositions or the like, your storage costs are not going to be severe. I like to think that most folks who are using practice management software or time billing and accounting software have looked at and investigated the cloud first options. And if you aren't there yet, you have reasoned as to why you are not there. You tell me, I've got DC law and I know how to use it and I'm retiring in 2 years. I'm not going to say, oh, well, you should do a migration from PC law to, I don't know, Leap or MyCase or Clio or whatever it is, and go through all this work. If you know how to use it and you've got a good backup system in place and you're retiring in a year or whatever, fine, go for it. But if you're still thinking on-premise first for your primary applications, have reasoned why you are doing that, because the cloud offerings offer great benefits. Like, they're centralized. Somebody else takes care of all the backups. You can, in many cases, add your own on top of theirs if you feel that's necessary. I have a few clients that do that. It's all trackable as far as your data. It's all managed from a central location. So if like if you're doing document management, if you get one of the business versions of something like even Dropbox, you get control over that data in a way that, sort of spit and baling wire together different personal Dropboxes would never achieve. So to the extent that you're looking at programs like a sync service or a backup service for the business, or, and we'll talk in just a minute, password managers, think in terms of programs that have a business version, and then that's the version that you buy, because that gives you the data management. It gives you one place where all of the user licenses are stored. So if you have a summer 1L intern or 2L intern or whatever, you can assign them the empty license, and then when they leave, you shut down that account. That license goes back in your bucket to be assigned to somebody you hire in the fall after they pass the exam or whatever the situation is. So even for sort of everyday stuff like Dropbox or password managers, think in terms of the business version, the team version, whatever they call that. It's generally a little bit more, depending on what your user numbers are, it might be a little bit more initially because you're getting some of those management features. But once you scale up on users to like 3, 4, 5, you're probably money ahead looking at the business version. So keep that in mind. When it comes to centralized password management, these are the 4 that I've been happy with all of them. For the company, Affinity and Lawyerist, we have used both Dashlane and RoboForm at different points. We're on RoboForm now. For my personal information, and having started out as a Mac user 20 years ago when I started at UVA, I use 1Password. I've been happy with that. Bitwarden has the unique advantage among these 4 on screen that if you don't want to store your data in the cloud, so if you don't, 1Password, Dashlane, RoboForm, they all sell the data is stored in the cloud, so that if I want to get the information on my iPhone, which I often do, it needs to have gotten there somewhere. By far, the easiest way to make that happen is that the data is stored in the cloud. If you don't want to do that, Bitwarden has an option where you take sole, complete, and total responsibility for its data, and that way you don't have to store on the cloud. Question in the chat on LastPass. So that's an interesting question. I expect that LastPass, for those of you who don't know, it's a competitor to these 4. Does mostly the same things. When I first got a password manager, this was in 2010, I want to say, something like that, maybe a little bit earlier. I got LastPass, and LastPass at that time was highly recommended by Steve Gibson, who even today does an excellent podcast called Security Now. If you want to get like a sort of like a yeoman's master's in computer security, start with episode 1 from, I don't know, like 2006 or 7, and just keep going. It's pretty interesting, and that's what he recommended at the time. And actually, I think also at the time they were a fairly small company. well, for those of you familiar with Northern Virginia, they were in downtown Vienna, Virginia, in like a second floor building there. In the last 3 or 4, well, particularly the last 2 or 3 years, they've had a couple of different security incidents where in one instance, they had an engineer who was working on company code on his personal laptop, and he had also on that personal laptop a media player system called Plex. I use Plex. That's how I watch like my old DVDs. I rip them to the computer and I watch them through Plex. There'd been a flaw in Plex, and he hadn't upgraded to the new version. Somebody targeted him, was able to bootstrap from that Plex software on his personal computer to whatever he'd put on for work on that computer, get into LastPass and run away with some data. Now, theoretically, the people whose data he ran away with should have a good password. They have one password that unlocks the keys to the kingdom. Theoretically, if that password's good, they walked away with something that still needs a bunch of work. Then LastPass was less than entirely forthcoming, or it was kind of like, they were vacillating between like, I don't know, image sort of minimization of what was going on, and they weren't transparent, and so it became a question of something like that. If you had a really good password and your data had been taken, you were probably okay. From a functional standpoint, it's probably it's probably just as good as these 4 programs. And like I said, I originally used it and was happy with it. It's just that kind of makes me a little bit nervous. Was more not so much, well, a little bit that the breach happened, but eventually that's going to happen to someone, I expect. But a little bit more on their handling of it. So from a technological perspective, I don't really have a reason to say, LastPass is not as good as the 4 on screen. They've also been through a couple of different ownership structures. So they were originally their own company there in Vienna, and then they were purchased by whoever owned LogMeIn, and then they might have been purchased or then spun off again. They've been through a few different ownership structures, which I assume for the employees, it's probably distracting. But again, from a technological perspective, I don't have a reason to say no to LastPass. I think they're probably as good. I haven't used them for several years and long before these recent incidents. So I think I switched to LastPass I switched from LastPass to 1Password like around 2014 or so. I always like to put this quote up anytime we're talking about storing information elsewhere. The cloud isn't some magical, mystical place. It's not heaven. It is some guy's hard drive elsewhere. Now, he might or she might know more about maintaining it, might have redundant power, redundant internet, the best fire suppression, the best security, stuff that you could never match in the broom closet where we used to keep our server. But it is ultimately just a computer that lives somewhere else. Encryption. I'm a big fan of encryption. The easiest thing to do for your own peace of mind is to turn on the encryption on your laptops and your desktops. On the Windows side of the fence, you need Windows Pro. If you're still on Windows 10, it's got to be Pro. If you're on Windows 11, it's got to be Pro. Turn on BitLocker. If you're on the Mac, it's under System Settings, Privacy, turn on File Vault. What this does is that, the experience for you as a user is no different. It's not going to slow it down. If you used encryption on hard drives years ago, don't worry about it. Not a problem anymore. But if you happen to leave your laptop at airport security, and back before the pandemic, 7,000 people a week were leaving laptops at airport security. If you go to the bathroom at the coffee shop and the laptop happens to walk away, obviously it's going to cost you some money to replace it, but the most valuable thing on there is making sure that the client data is safe. So turn these encryptions on for your laptops. They're built by the operating system vendor, not a third party. So if Windows doesn't update, Mac doesn't update, it should be completely seamless. We've had a few instances where folks, and this was probably 5 or 6 years ago, where folks were running a Dell disk encryption, something that Dell Enterprise had put together. And there would occasionally be a situation where you would update Windows and you couldn't get back into the computer because there was some disagreement between the Windows update and Dell's low-level encryption. That was kind of a mess. So I recommend that you look at the whatever's coming from the operating system vendor. On the phone and tablet side, you probably have to make an effort to not have them encrypted. If you look on an iPhone, you go to, I'd have to check, but I think if you go to the bottom of general, or you go to the bottom of the privacy one where you set your thumb or your Face ID, it'll tell you that it's encrypted, and that's where you can even turn on that if somebody tries 10 times in the thing with the wrong, the wrong passcode or thumbprint or stuff, it'll automatically wipe itself. So for the mobile devices, unless you've made a real effort, those are probably encrypted by default. For the computers, in a lot of cases, you still have to turn this on manually. If you're walking around with tons of data and you want to have it in a physical form as opposed to storing it in a cloud, there are hard drives that you can buy, and they look all CIA-like because some of them have actual PIN codes on the drives themselves. You pay a premium for that, naturally, but that's definitely an option. If you just want to carry around lots of data, but you want the drive encrypted, you can use BitLocker to encrypt an external hard drive that you attach to your laptop or computer. On the Mac, you wouldn't go through the settings. You would use the disk utility program that is built into every Mac, and you could create an encrypted drive, again, just using the operating system vendor's tools. You don't get cool keypads, though, to press like you're a secret agent, but you could have the same or nearly the same level of security. And it would be probably dramatically cheaper than buying these. Same thing with USB sticks. If you need secure USB sticks, again, they have ones with little keypads. You could accomplish the same thing using the BitLocker built into Windows or the disk utility on the Mac to just encrypt that entire volume, but you wouldn't have the cool keypad. Turn on any sort of biometrics that you might have access to. Usually, most new laptops would have a thumbprint reader. A few laptops on the Windows side will do what's called Windows Hello. That's the graphic on the far right. Apple doesn't have any laptops that do Face ID, and even if you have an external webcam like the one I'm using here, you don't get Face ID. So if you're on the computer, on the laptop desktop side of the fence for Apple, you can get the Touch ID on keypads, but you can't get the Face ID. Whereas Windows, a lot of times, will have the fingerprint, and a fair number of the newer laptops will do, with their built-in webcam, will do the Windows Hello, their version of Face ID. If you want to put data on the cloud, or if you want to put it on an external hard drive, but you don't care about getting those cool CIA-type keypads, this is a program that you can download and create an encrypted volume, encrypt individual folders. And then, for example, if you want to put those encrypted folders on, say, Dropbox, unless you're paying for Dropbox Enterprise, Dropbox holds the encryption key, meaning that they can unlock and provide readable data to the government, to opposing counsel with a subpoena or whatever. If you use something like Cryptometer or Cryptometer, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it, then you could have, say you have 10 folders on Dropbox, but you only really care about encrypting one because it's psychological evaluations of a kid or several kids in a divorce action. You could encrypt that one folder. Any folder that you encrypt with Cryptometer is going to have sort of limited access if you went to like the Dropbox iPhone app or Android app. But that's not really the point. The point is to make sure that what Dropbox holds is not something that they can reveal to other people. When we think about mobile devices, turn on the Find My. Everything has a Find My now. Apple devices have had them for a while, including some versions of AirPods. Google, on the Google side, Android phones, Chromebooks have them. I think the Pixel notebooks do as well, if there's still any of those out there. And then Windows 11 has a Find My feature as well. So if you have a Windows 11 laptop, there is a Find My feature that you can activate that works in the same way that these products do for their respective mobile devices. So keep that in mind. We talked a little bit about disposal earlier. If you have time and you're interested, go to this page in the materials. That link to the CBS News video is a live link, and you can watch on YouTube. This was a story that they did about 10 or 15 years ago on essentially they went to like a warehouse or reselling of used copy machines and used medical imagery equipment, and they just bought these machines and to see what they could do, and they found out that the hard drives, because most of these are just like simple computers, hard drives were full of images that people had made photocopies of, but what the Xerox machine effectively did was they took a picture, wrote that picture to a file on the hard drive, and then printed off copies in that way. It wasn't constantly photographing it, so to speak. And so the hard drives were full of like medical records and like patent type drawings that were eventually submitted for patents, things like that. It was super interesting. So it's like a, I don't know, 15-minute video, however long a 60 minutes type segment would be. Some of them were from the Buffalo Police Department, and so there were records, different evidentiary records, including records from their sex crimes division. It's a really interesting story to follow. But that's why when I was mentioning early on that if you have some of these devices floating around, A, make sure they're up to date, and B, if you're not sure when you're going to use it next and you don't really have a plan, it might be beneficial to wipe it. So if it goes missing, so you've reduced your potential area of exposure. And now we'll do item 7. This is obviously the most active, the most energetic these days when we think about what's going on in legal tech and especially how small firms can benefit from it. When we think about AI, it's essentially simulating or pretending to think like humans. The really interesting thing that we've seen with the newest versions of AI, these LLMs, this generative AI, is that it's not just doing the stuff that we've seen in the past. So in the past, there's some artificial intelligence going on when Netflix gives you a cue, or Google Maps or Apple Maps routes you somewhere. There's some calculations and intelligence going on, but it's not producing new work. It's not writing some new piece of material. It's not writing a new musical composition. It's not creating an image when you say, show me a unicorn eating pickles or whatever, and you type that into DALL-E or ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever, and it can generate an image of a unicorn eating pickles. So past examples of computer artificial intelligence were not the creation of brand new things. They were, the analysis of what's out there. But in some ways, it's doing the same thing. It's taking a bunch of data and it's analyzing it and it's responding to your questions. So if you're as old as I am and you played Oregon Trail on, I think there were Tandy computers from Radio Shack, you would tell the little stagecoach to go a little bit further around, and then it would produce a response to that, and then you would tell it what to do after that. Oh, someone's on it. They were TRS 80s. Thank you in the chat if you're interested in that. Thanks. So in some ways, we've been giving it input. It's producing output, but it's doing it a lot faster. It's doing it with a lot more interesting data. We have to always want to keep in mind when we put any information into an AI, what are the limitations we're looking at? Well, one is it's only as good as the data we give it. So if we give it kind of mediocre data, we're likely to get a mediocre response. It's only as good as the prompt that we give it. So you could have the best data in the world, but if you ask kind of a mediocre or bad question, it's got to take that question and interpret it in its way and figure out what it's going to do with it. So if you ask a mediocre question, you might get a mediocre response. And then there's the interplay of the two, which you and I don't have any real role in. We can make sure we've got good data. We can make sure we know how to write a good prompt. And then what's the interplay between the prompt being analyzed and translated into something that the AI understands as to what it should do with what you asked? And that's right now, for the most part, unless you're really ahead of the game, that's kind of a black box. There are several open source LLMs out there. If you're interested in experimenting, do a quick search. You can download them and assuming you have a relatively new computer, probably run them and do some experimentation. But you can definitely control number one. You can definitely control number two. And then there was an article a couple years ago in the Wall Street Journal about perhaps prompt engineering would become its own field. So in the same way that we've heard the stories many times that cars replaced horse and buggy, the people who made the best buggy whips in the world, maybe there are still 2 or 3 people and they make them for, I don't know, horses that go around Central Park or something. But for the most part, people who would have made or did make buggy whips found new ways to spend their time. That might be a situation where if somebody was doing traditionally rote work that an AI can now do, maybe prompt engineering is someplace to look at. The same token, Sam Altman, who runs OpenAI, kind of has a good point where he says, if we have to have a bunch of people trained in how to write these prompts, it means we probably didn't make a great product. It'd be like saying, it'd be like comparing DOS to a Mac or Windows. When you were in DOS, you had to know a lot more about what you were doing, and you had to spell everything right and put the right commands in the right order. By the time we moved to, clicking on pictures, we sort of dispensed with the need for having, I don't know, DOS prompt engineers, so to speak. So not sure how far that'll go. Few statistics to keep in mind. 2023, that was sort of the very, very beginning of our AI interest, is certainly in legal and probably just about anywhere in the sort of general environment. How many people are using it now? 50 to 80% in 2025. Specifically with respect to some numbers in the legal profession, 11%, according to Lexis, had used it by the end of 2023. 2024, Clio was saying 19%, and this would be among Clio users. This is from their legal trends reports. This would be focused on responses they get from Clio folks. 2025, that had increased by 60%. We went from 19 to 79. Similar, but not quite as dramatic with respect to the ABA surveys. We went from 35 in 24 to 54 and up through March of 25. And then we at Affinity and Lawyers done a few sort of small scale surveys on our own. And our number pretty much matches the ABA number there at 52. What are people using AI for in their practice? Predictions, words. I use it honestly a lot as a thesaurus, or I use it as a search engine. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit. Email completion. I was talking to a client who uses a program with Gmail called Serif that he attaches this to his Gmail. And so you have to be comfortable with that. You have to give the AI access to your Gmail. And then it monitors your incoming email and it drafts, does not send, but it automatically drafts replies to each of your incoming emails. And so you can pull it up, look at the draft, say, oh, I don't actually need to respond to that, delete the draft and maybe the message, or say, yeah, that looks good, boom, send it off, or I'm going to make a couple edits and then we'll send it off. So I could imagine that being a real benefit, especially if you get a lot of emails or probably at some point in the near future, text messages or instant message type communications through a practice management program, clients asking, some standard question that you can rattle off in your sleep, or, what's the next court date or something like that, other things that the system could answer. And that would be super handy, whether it shows up as a draft and then you come in the morning and say, yep, that looks good, send it. Or if it's something like the next court date, you might trust the system to just respond and say, your next, our next court date is whatever it is. Looking up client information, the practice management programs have a fair number of AI sort of functions that would kind of keep you up to date. And I'll show you a few of those on the slide here in just a bit. And then a few other research options. That's still a little sketchy unless, if you've sort of dove in head first with either Lexis Protege, or I think it's either Westlaw Precision, I think is their different name for their AI component. I do know that gets pretty pricey pretty quickly. I have a client who has set up like the full panoply of Westlaw AI stuff for his firm. He's got 3 people working there. I think it's either just him and an associate and a support staff, or maybe just him and 2 support staff. Anyway, it's like $2,000 a month for, going all in for 3 people for the Westlaw capabilities on AI. So it's a little pricey. What are folks using it for in their practice? This might be like a Bezos chart because we don't have any actual numbers here. But for the most part, general writing, a little bit less for legal writing. I think marketing and administrative tasks would be a great way to use it, especially if you've not gone through or had not had the need, but now you see the need for creating something like an employee manual. Maybe you're finally hiring your, third person and you think, well, we ought to write some of these things down. Same thing for administrative tasks. There are plenty of things that don't involve putting client sensitive or client confidential or even business confidential information into an AI that could still save you a bundle of time. If you're doing a lot of your own marketing, super helpful for even just coming up with ideas for blogs or for newsletter articles if you do newsletters with folks. Lots of things that you can do that are not, trying to expose the client information, but still save you a ton of time. Biggest concerns that we're seeing when we think about AI in a legal context presently. Is it appropriate to use? We've had some conversations with folks about whether they should include an AI provision or call out in their engagement agreements that we might use these products for these purposes. And, we've vetted the terms of service, and this AI is not going to keep your data. It's not going to train on your data, et cetera, et cetera. Drafting work saves a bunch of time. I think the number I saw from the Clio Legal Trends report for would have been 2024, they released last October, was somewhere in the neighborhood of, they thought 57% of tasks that people in a law firm do each day can either be greatly accelerated or eliminated with AI. And it doesn't mean that lawyers are going anywhere. It means that the stuff that you didn't learn about in law school that no one said you had to do might just get easier and take a bunch less time. And so I think of that as a net positive, that you think about the things that you do each day, like responding to an email, but with the client, when's the next court date? You can automate that. Doesn't make you any less valuable. The client gets a pretty darn instant response, and it frees up some time either for you or the support staffer to do something that involves more thinking than just a call and response type thing. So lots of good things that you can use AI for: summarizing cases, statutes, summarizing your own notes. I'll show you an example of my notes when I ran them through respectively ChatGPT and Copilot. I got some pretty different responses between the two. Help writing and drafting. Remember that for the most part, they don't have access to legal specific resources. So if you say, help me draft an indemnification clause for a particular type of agreement, you would probably be best getting a response from a legal specific LLM, whether it's co-counsel, whether it's protege, whether you do something with Spellbook or something like that. For those types of situations, you might want a legal specific LLM to help with legal drafting, and then creating graphics for things like presentations, CLE, stuff like that. Certainly a nice, easy way to go about that. I've gotten some interesting CLE graphics. There's a course out there, I think it's by two professors in Washington State, where, pardon my language, but I think that the course is like The Bullshit Machine. And it talks about how AI is effectively autocomplete on steroids. Doesn't mean that what it puts out isn't correct and isn't useful. It means that in some cases, it's like Cliff's Notes. Like if you could read Julius Caesar, or you could read Cliff's Notes. Cliff's Notes is going to tell you, like, who are the characters, what's the plot, what are the big points, how does it end? It'll probably help you get 100 on the did you read quiz, but it's not the same. Question in the chat: would you characterize the summarization results between Copilot and ChatGPT? I use both and find that they're different. ChatGPT seems to do a better job, but I worry it is less secure for client-related notes than Copilot is integrated with Microsoft 365. I generally get better results from ChatGPT as well. I have not been super impressed, frankly, with Copilot. There are a couple of things that I have done that worked pretty well. For example, if you go to our lawyer's YouTube channel, we've got some videos, and then I make the video, and then I take the script from that video and I've dumped it into Copilot to go through and create an article out of it. Take the transcript, create an article that we can post on the website that will accompany the YouTube video. It does okay with that. It doesn't do a bad job with that. But for summarization, it has gotten better. I used to do a demo, and there might be some in the archives when the practice management section is up, with Copilot, where I would ask it, are there any cases in a particular document? And it would say, nope, document doesn't cite any cases. And then I go to Microsoft Word and I open the find panel and I just put in V period, which is the laziest way in the world to see if there's a case in a document. And of course, it came back with something like 6. So it doesn't do that anymore. It's gotten better at that. So I can't actually demo that live anymore because they fixed that. But when we're thinking about whether you to use ChatGPT or Copilot, there are a couple things to think about, broadly speaking. One is there are there are tiers of ChatGPT where you can pay for, whether you're a business or an individual. And then there's an option, there's either a toggle switch, because I actually looked into this recently. I use ChatGPT all the time for my own personal stuff, and I have my own personal account, and I don't pay for it. But there's either a toggle in the settings where you can tell it not to save, or I think what I had to do is I had to go through their help system, and there's like an automated form that you can submit that says, "Don't save my stuff." And then you get a reply like 12 hours later that says, "All right, we've configured your ChatGPT to not save or train on your stuff." Obviously, if you do that, you have to take them at their word, that sort of thing. So there's that option with the free account, because I've done that, in the last 2 weeks or so. And then if you go into one of the paid versions, or certainly the enterprise version, we have an enterprise version for the company. As the administrator for that, you can shut that off without even having to submit requests. So there are those options, and I would feel comfortable using ChatGPT in those, certainly in the paid version, and you told them you shut it off. For a Copilot, the advantage really comes in that it can get a holistic view of what's going on. So it's not just looking at the one document that you asked to summarize. It's, assuming you're storing your other documents in SharePoint or OneDrive, and you're using Exchange for email, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to have a better view overall of your firm and your voice if you ask it to draft something. So I would expect over the long term that Copilot would catch up. But by the same token, if you follow the news on this sort of thing, Microsoft and OpenAI are kind of in a squabble now, because OpenAI wants to become some combination of a nonprofit plus a for-profit, and Microsoft has invested 14 billion in various ways into the OpenAI, and they're kind of arguing about how they're going to, if they're going to do this, and how they're going to do it. So if there's a separation at some point, ChatGPT might just pace Copilot, and they might end up in a situation like Apple is kind of now, where you can, if you have ChatGPT, you can kind of plug it into your Mac or into your iPhone and use that natively for some functions. In which case, then you get the nice Apple interface, but you get the better quality of ChatGPT. There might be some point in the future where you can do that with say Microsoft Word or Outlook, and you can kind of plug in ChatGPT as the AI as opposed to Copilot, but obviously not anytime soon. And as they're introducing more models and they're doing newer models, we're seeing an actual increase in hallucinations. So keep that in mind. It's always important to know that an AI is basically a probabilistic machine. It's going to, based on math, what is the next most probable word that I should put in here? There was a really interesting presentation I saw a while ago. I'm trying to remember the fellow's name. So, but if you search like Microsoft and AI and attorneys, his name will come up. I'm blanking on it now. He's a big fan of Columbo, the old TV show. I do remember that for some reason. Anyway, he gave a presentation at the ABA Tech Show, and he was talking about probabilistic ways that AI works. So if you've been having a bit of a quote conversation with AI, and you've been talking about, if you were a kid and you were asking about nature, and you said, AI, ChatGPT, complete this, or Copilot, complete this sentence, the sky is, it might say blue. If you've been talking to it about weather patterns, it might say, the sky is clear. If you've been talking to it about career opportunities, it might say the sky is the limit. So the context in which you ask an AI question frames the response that you will get, because it'll help guide it on what sort of resources and which route it should be taking. So it's designed to understand human language. It's probabilistic, not deterministic. So 90% of the time you might get the same response, but 10% of the time you'll get something completely off the wall. One thing to keep in mind, especially if you're going to use this for work that you're going to, of course, review before you submit it to a court or the client, is that there is this option of retrieval augmented generation. And this is kind of what I was touching on when we were talking about the sort of the distinction or differences between Copilot and ChatGPT earlier, in that retrieval augmented generation has the AI, produce its response, and then it checks that response against the stuff that it knows about you. So it grounds its responses in whatever real information it has. So if you've given it, if you're using the Lexis or the Westlaw one, it's going to ground it in information it has access to. If you've given it access to your private documents in SharePoint or iManage or NetDocuments, it'll ground it in that information versus just relying on what's kind of publicly available on the internet. So ChatGPT and Perplexity do not do that. They just don't have the option to do that right now. Copilot, NetDocuments, if you're paying for their AI tools, iManage, Lexis, Westlaw, they all use retrieval augmented generation. So it's not, in those cases, it's not just the AI sort of generating it and handing it back to you and saying, here. The AI is going to generate it, compare it, and check it against the stuff that it has access to, and then return it to you. So you should generally get a better response. Question in the chat about Claude. I'm not sure. I'd have to check that. I don't actually know off the top of my head, but you could probably ask Claude and it would tell you. But yeah, it's one of the newer sort of enhancements. So I expect they'll all probably have it at some point. So you can also use one AI to check another AI. I've done that before. Use the same AI to fact check itself. So if you ask it to give it, if you ask it for help on a blog post or something, you say, give me the arguments in favor of X, Y, and Z. And then you can turn around and have ask it to argue against itself. Like, okay, you presented me the top 5 reasons to do this particular thing. What are the strongest criticisms of each of those 5? And then it says, da 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 da. And then you could say, what are the strongest rejoinders or counter arguments to those criticisms? You can have the AI argue with itself. It's all natural language. I think this is probably one of the best features of it and I particularly with ChatGPT, it does a remarkably good job, I think, of parsing my prompts and producing kind of what I intend, in some cases more than what I just wrote. So I'm generally pretty happy with that. A little bit less so with Copilot. Perplexity is pretty good. I like those. So it's worth experimenting. Give the AI more context and detail. The more you can provide, the more it will help shape the output. Change the words that you use when you're asking for something. If you say analyze this versus evaluate, you could get very different responses. Tone matters. There was an article not too long ago where Sam Altman was quoted as saying, we're wasting however much power or water or whatever by having ChatGPT respond with "you're welcome," because it has to churn through, and you write "thank you for the information," and it writes back "you're welcome, glad I could be of help." I still think it matters. There's an interesting piece of information. Let me see if I've got that in the slide here, where we learn that being polite to the AI actually gives you better performance. And impolite prompts, we see a 30% drop. It's pretty interesting stuff. So keep that in mind. You could be professional. You don't have to flirt with it or anything, but do keep in mind that how you interact with it sort of also influences its responses. These are all in the material, so don't feel like you have to write madly. Clear and unambiguous prompts are helpful. So not what are the 10 most important, if you have Copilot in Outlook, not what are the 10 most important emails in my inbox, but, create a table of the 10 most important emails, give more weight to the emails from our managing partner and from clients, give less weight to any email where I am only CC'd or BCC'd. Not a good example of saying highlight examples where the settlement value is high. Tell it what you think high is. Show me examples where the settlement value exceeds $5 million. And not summarize the meeting, but summarize the key points regarding a particular event, so the client's merger and acquisition strategy, and we want to focus on financials, due diligence, regulatory, and integration planning. The more specific you can be, the better you will get. And if you do have access to Copilot in that sense, then you can save some of those prompts essentially on your home screen for Copilot in Teams, and then you can just keep running them. So you could, every week, check the 10 most important emails you got that week and so forth. There's another example in the material on writing a prompt. So it kind of breaks it down. This was an example that Lexis provided a while ago, and I really like that. So that gives you an idea of how to structure an actual, if you want to do an inquiry for legal purposes. And then the one thing I do want to mention as we're running out of time here is that I use ChatGPT predominantly for my search engine stuff anymore. I don't use Google hardly at all anymore. And I'm going to drop out because it kind of cut off that nice little quote I saw from somebody on Mastodon, which is, I mean, you think about how we do research today, or 3 years ago with respect to Google. Like we type in things, we'd try to clean through the muck to find the thing we wanted, and we do that several times a day. Right now, I would say ChatGPT, and to a lesser extent, the other ones are kind of at the point where Google was like in 2005. It's like it just delivers the response that you're looking for. Now and it's getting better at providing, say, footnotes so you can double check your sources. But compared to, for example, if I needed a couple weeks ago, I needed to know how to like reseason a cast iron skillet. And so I did this. I went into Google and I said, reseason cast iron skillet. And it gave me, like page and a half of like top 10 lists of cast iron skillets that I can, of course, click through and buy on Amazon. No information or very little information or tons of ads on any page. And it was just hilarious how bad it was. Whereas if I went to ChatGPT, I just said, what do I do to do this? And it said, here are the 5 steps, just go do them. It was amazing. So keep that in mind too. Questions that you would typically spend a ton of time researching or fighting through Google's SEO mess, try them in an AI and see what you get. So there's some interesting, things to think about right now at the end of the PDF that goes with this. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I really appreciate your time. I'm going to turn it back over to Paul to close us out.
Yeah, thanks so much as always. Very interesting stuff. We'll have the slide put on the website. So if you want to pull it down and go through it fuller, please come and see it. Please come and see that story about the artificial intelligence LEO as well. I think you'll find that quite interesting. Our next PMA webinar is going to be on Wednesday, September the 24th. We are going to take a switch from artificial intelligence. On the 24th, we're going to be talking about targeting success, build a plan to hit your financial goals. You may well be on your way to putting together your 2026 budget, and I'm sure we'll have some valuable information that you can use. Jeff, we appreciate it. We will see you next time. Bye now.